Yes.
All right, great. Well, yeah, you just saw Gaylon move off camera. We're going to play tag team on this. And so, to our friends in South Texas, I just verified with Gaylon. I think we heard on the call. Some of you are already started planting, but for the rest of you, we do want to talk about maybe some ideas on things that you can do last minute as you prepare for the new season. And so I'm going to start with some out of the box ideas, look at the climate outlook, talk about planters a little bit and plant population. And I'm going to go fairly quick because Galen's going to talk about some really important topics around seed quality, nitrogen, and weeds. We know we were coming up on a challenging season. The latest increase in gas and fertilizer prices is not helping at all. And so we just want to call some things to your attention, things you may already know, things you may have forgotten about as we take on this challenge. So first, out of box thinking, and this is probably the one slide that is my most important and one that some of you may push back on. But if you haven't used AI or artificial intelligence or these chat things, I encourage you to take a shot at it this year. I've listed all the different ones that are really popular. My favorite on that list, if you don't already have an account, would be ChatGPT, and the next one in line would be Claude. And you can pay $20 for a month subscription. You can cancel after the first month if you really hate it. But as we're trying to think out of the box, AI can help. And so I would not advocate AI right now to answer the question about what herbicide should I apply, what rate should I use. But if you want some help on strategic thinking, maybe thinking of some approaches that you hadn't, or maybe some things you had forgotten about, I encourage you to try AI this year just to see so we can get every ounce of help we can find. And so this is an example prompt. One of the things about AI to get the most use out of it, you've really got to ask it some good questions. And so you could start, this sounds kind of silly, but you can tell it, I want a thoughtful and creative answer. What are most impactful strategies as a U.S. cotton farmer I can use to help minimize economic risk this year, given low crop prices, high input cost? And then you can tell it what city and state you're in, how many acres you have, and give it some details, and then it will, and see what it comes back with, and just have an interaction with it. And I won't say, importantly, don't just take its word for it, right? You've got to verify everything it says. But in terms of that's why I'm advocating it for strategic thinking, because you can tell if it's a bad idea, if it's a stupid idea, you know it's a stupid idea, and you can say AI is really not that smart. But maybe it does give you something you hadn't thought about, and then you can just kind of interact with it, have a chat with it over text, just like you would your consultant. One of the things, in order to get the most out of the AI, they have different modes. And for this type of strategic thinking, I'd encourage you to turn on the thinking mode or deep thinking mode. Here's all the different ones. Most of them where they have the little prompt to type in your question, you can find the settings. And so this is like for Gemini or for Claude, extended thinking. Chat is the only one up in the corner. You can tell it to use thinking mode so that it really takes some time and gives some thought to the answers it's giving you. But I would just, if you haven't played with this, I'd encourage you to try it. We have a board member here in North Carolina, Rob Fleming, who is making extensive use of AI on his farm and having really good results. So if you know Rob and want some ideas, reach out to him. Another thing that's new this year that we have at Cotton Incorporated, we have an automation advisory committee, and one of the things we were talking about a year ago on automation, they're like, if we can't stay in business, there's nothing going to be to automate. So they really encourage us to look at some economic tools. And so I worked with our senior economist, John Devine, and Shane Isbell is also on our board out of Alabama. And Shane just happened to run into this economist, Ryan Loya, from University of Arkansas at the Farm and Gin Show last year, and they had a tool for Arkansas to look at profitability. And so they've adapted this now so that it should work across the whole U.S. A disclaimer, this is kind of like a beta version. We were still debugging it last week and making changes. So if you want to try this, do. But if you see any problems with it, don't hesitate to give me an email, and we'll see if we can get it fixed. But you come in, just tell it what state you're in, what county you're in, then some basic practices. This lint percentage is to help value cottonseed. So 44% is the national average. We're around $220 a ton. So these are just the basic information, and then it will generate this chart. And on the left here is the cotton price going from a low 40 cents per pound up to $1 per pound. We'd love to see that, wouldn't we? And then this is where the county level information is used. It shows you kind of the yield range for your county. And so that's why I picked Mississippi County. They have a nice yield range. They have some really good yields there sometimes. And so where it's red, that means, based, and I'm going to show you on the next screen where you put in some of your enterprise expenses. You're going to lose money. Into black, you're going to gain money in that scenario. So if we could get, we're down here at 60 cents, we're going to need 1,600 pounds based on this scenario. And one of the things I will caution you on this is using kind of a state level budget for the enterprise expenses. So you're going to want to go in. Oh, another thing, just it's counting in here. Here's kind of the cottonseed value, because one of the things it includes is ginning cost. And so you have to take account for the value of that cottonseed, because lots of times people ignore it because they're using it to cover their ginning costs. But there's some good income that the cottonseed brings to you, as well as the fiber. And then, again, I'd encourage you to look at the enterprise budget, because there's some things in here, like this example, it's assuming that you're going to make 8 aerial applications at $10 an application per acre. So that's another $80. So maybe if that's something you don't anticipate this year, you can just hit remove. You can also add operating expenses on this line. And so you can kind of customize it to your farm to get an idea of, what's the possibility of making some money this year. Another thing I'd encourage you is to think about this at the field level, because, you got some fields that love cotton, and those are the fields you're going to want to plant cotton in this year. And so you could look at maybe that higher yield level and then come in here and customize what you think the prices are for that field. So that's a new tool. And all these links, I'm going to share a lot of links, and Stacy's going to share them out later. Just quickly on looking at the weather, what's the long-term weather forecast for this year? I'm no Eric Snodgrass, but if you saw some of his weather videos, I'll share a link on the next slide where you can find him. But if we look at some of the information NOAA's putting out right now, they're not saying, the precipitation outlook, through May is not bad. It's kind of normal, maybe a little bit drier in the West Texas, which we don't like, but it's not saying it's going to be terrible. A little bit warmer. So maybe we'll have, right now that's not the case, but hopefully come planting time, we'll see some good warm temperatures for planting. And when we look at this, one of the things that I pay a lot of attention to is this ENSO. You've heard of El Nino and La Nina and all these different phases. And why I pay attention to it, some time ago we had a guy at University of Florida, Claude Fraze, go through and look at the last 30 years of county level cotton yields. And what was the ENSO phase? Was it La Nina? Was it neutral, or El Nino? And you can see the red means it was below average cotton yields in that county, and the green means above average cotton yields. And you can see in La Nina, nobody likes La Nina. And the good news down here, these blue bars represent the probability of staying in La Nina. So we're coming out of La Nina. That's the good news. Then it says we're going to go through this neutral phase really quick, which the Southeast kind of likes. And it's not really that bad for Texas. I think one of the things that makes county yields in Texas a little tricky to interpret is when you have a really bad year, the dry land doesn't get counted. And so you only get the irrigated acres. So, and in reality, neutral is not necessarily a bad thing in West Texas. And then we're going to rapidly move into El Nino. And now that looks like, well, that's going to be bad for the East Coast. But really, one of the reasons I think we see some, like especially in South Carolina, we see some lower yields in El Nino conditions is that's for planting season, and it can be cool and wet, and so that can delay planting and make less than ideal planting conditions. But the good news is El Nino is probably going to come in after planting season, so that so my main point is I'm not going to give you any strong bets on the weather, but it's not right now. The forecast is not dismal, so that's good. We've got at least some hope on the weather conditions. Right up here, I don't know that I put this in the links I sent to Stacy, but if you like Eric Snodgrass, this ag-wx.com, that's kind of his webpage. A lot of it's behind a paywall, but right now the videos are still free. And so if you enjoyed his videos and want to keep watching them, they're not specific to the Cotton Belt. They're for the whole U.S. and for every crop, but you still can access some of his videos from that link. Well, another thing I meant to mention here, you see some inconsistencies where you see some greens, like Georgia's pretty resilient in a lot of these scenarios. And one of the things about Georgia is it has more irrigation. And so, and one of the reasons we don't show the West in this analysis is because a lot of the ENSO effects are due to changes in precipitation, and where areas that are already irrigated, ENSO has less of an impact. So another thing, when I'm talking with some of y'all, you tell me how that one field got that rainfall that the rest didn't, and it yielded 200 pounds more. So we know water is obviously very important. But then when it comes to managing irrigation, sometimes that's the last thing you manage. And so I'm going to challenge you this year, if you do have irrigation on your farm, to really spend some time thinking about when you need to turn it on, when you need to turn it off. We have a lot of tools on Cotton Cultivated to help you do that. One of the ones that's out there is CropFit. It's a simple app that goes on your phone, and you can access national weather data if you don't have a weather station near your house. And it will give you, if you're east of the Mississippi, it's a pretty good tool to use. When you get into West Texas and where you got deficit irrigation, I wouldn't recommend it. And we've struggled to get it to work with the growing degree days in Arizona. But for those of you along the Mississippi and to the east, it's a good tool to take a look at. Also, as you get ready to plant, make sure you have a sufficient planter capacity. We have a fact sheet out there that shows kind of every state, and based on this kind of planter performance. So this is 5 miles an hour in different, 12 to 24 row planters with these different field, acres per hour. And then what this is the number of days suitable for field work based on historic conditions in that state. And so this is published by USDA. And so just looking at Alabama here, it says about 22 days are suitable for planting during this planting window in Alabama. And so if you're running a 24 row planter, that's saying you could probably get 6,000 acres. Now, if these numbers are probably on the low side for field capacity because a lot of this data was collected in Tennessee by Mike Buschermole on fields that were 50 acres or smaller. So you might be able to get a little more out. Also, if you go to high-speed planting, you can't quite double these numbers, but you could, multiply by about 1.7. And so you could just see, you could increase some of your capacity by going to high-speed planting. If that's something you're interested in, we do have 2 papers on that are available from these links on precision planting. We've had studies with Wes Porter in Georgia, Wes Lowe in Mississippi, John Long in Oklahoma, and Pedro Sanchez in Arizona, all looking at these precision planter technologies, having good results. And what gives me even a better feeling is at our cotton and rice meeting this year, Nick McMission and his son, Matt, talked about their experiences with high-speed planting, and it really was positive. They were really happy with the results they were getting. And one of the things about these precision planters is not only can you go faster, you get better seed distribution, more uniform stands, and more consistent depth placement. So not only can you go faster, you can actually probably do a better job planting. If you have challenges planting in the heavy residues. Tyson Raper helped develop a little fact sheet on what to do there that's also available from cotton cultivated. Last thing I have is looking at plant population. That's you're trying to save money on seed. Can I cut back my population? And this one, I do want to set the context for this chart. If you wanted to upset our former agronomist that preceded Gaylon was Dr. Bob Nichols. If you want to upset Dr. Bob, all you had to do is say you want to do a plant population study in cotton. He'd blow his top because he said it's been done so much. And so what we had is a scientist out of Texas took all these studies around the country and normalized them and looked what was the kind of overall response to cotton and plant population. And this, remember, I'm saying plant population, not seeding rate. And also this assumes the plants are pretty well uniformly spaced, that when you could go as low as 15,000 evenly spaced cotton plants and not really hurt your yield. But notice it falls off a cliff after that. So you don't want to get down to 15,000 plants. That's getting pretty risky. But what it does say is we can get much lower on plant population probably than a lot of people are doing. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Gaylon to talk more about seed quality.
Thanks, Ed. It's a pleasure to be here today and have the opportunity to visit with you. And following up on some of Ed's points earlier, I mean, we recognize the fact that, prices are not cotton prices, but inputs are high and cotton prices are low, and you guys are pinched in a lot of ways. But a couple of things we wanted to make sure that, you don't go overboard either in cutting these costs, and which would be detrimental to yield and your overall profitability. So we're going to talk about some of the pros and cons as we go through some of my presentation. And following up on Ed's comments about the plant population, we really about 5 years ago started doing quite a bit of research on planting seed quality. There had really been a deficit for probably 20 or 25 years looking at planting seed quality, and due to some incidents that occurred and also looking at, how low can we go on the plant population, we started reinvesting and looking at, planting seed quality, with the main objective being, how to improve stand establishment, how to better predict stand establishment. And that research is ongoing, found some interesting information, still a lot more to be found, again, because we're kind of rebuilding that knowledge base, if you will. But we'll discuss a few details in a little bit. The other thing that we found through that process is there's also a lot of inconsistencies in the seed testing labs. So we are working with many of the seed testing labs on how to refine that so that there is more consistency and less variability from lab to lab, because that creates confusion in the industry for the growers, but it also creates friction between the seed companies and the growers and the seed testing lab. So we're working on that front as well, and hopefully we'll make some changes will occur before too long. The other thing, I work with Evie Jaconis a lot, who is like the post-harvest cotton seed. So with this planting seed quality and post-harvest seed quality, Evie and I are working a lot together within Cotton Incorporated, but we're also working with researchers and scientists and the industry, the seed companies, to kind of work, in parallel or together to come to some, benefits that will benefit the entire industry. We don't want to do research that's not going to be implementable by the seed companies and that aren't going to, be a benefit to you guys as farmers long term. The good thing is, one of the characteristics of cottonseed oil is something that's common, that's a benefit across the industry. It's beneficial to the farmer from planting seed quality, because cottonseed with more oil in it has better seedling vigor for the most part. It's good for animal feed, higher nutrient, better energy there, and then also good for any of the mills that would be out there and pressing that cottonseed for oil. So at least there's that one common denominator at this point that we are trying to move forward. Now, regarding planting seed quality and what you can kind of take home from a management perspective, I think probably the most important thing is growers should ask about the seed quality that the seed companies have. The seed companies are only really required to provide the warm germination, but there's a lot more information that they collect. Cool germ, VMD, some of the other things they have, and in many cases they may have that information over a time frame to see if some trends are going on, whether seed quality or germination is increasing or decreasing, because that does actually occur to some degree. But just request that seed information from those seed companies and gather as much knowledge as you can about the seed quality before you put it in the ground. And then based off that, you can kind of determine which varieties could be planted earlier than others based off the seed quality. Still warm germination is the most important thing. That's warm germination occurs under ideal conditions, but that's an indicator whether that's a viable seed or not. And you got to have a viable seed to get that started. And then, the other thing we've learned from the research is this cool germination test, which many of us have leaned on and even promoted over the years. It's a complex issue. And, if you're getting a cool germination test and it's showing that's a high cool germination, that's a great thing. But the other thing we're learning is you can also get a good stand with some fairly low cool germination tests, as long as the warm germ is high. The other thing is, I talked about the variability from the seed testing labs. There's a tremendous amount of variability in the cool germination test, depending on which lab is running it, and even the same lab over time. So this is really where some of the research focus has been, is we're working with North Carolina State with Keith Edmondson, Guy Collins, and the graduate student is Mike Phillips working on identifying a better cool germination test. To the right here, the current cool germination test requires a radical length of 4 centimeters within 7 days, again, under those cool temperatures. But this correlation here, it shows only about a 50% correlation between the cool germ test and stand establishment. And it seems counterintuitive, but actually, if we start and move it back to a shorter radical length measurement, we're actually better predicting stand establishment, both under poor conditions, which would be cooler conditions, but also under excellent conditions. So we're working with the seed trade associations, American Seed Trade Association, working with several of the public seed testing labs to try to get and modify this cool germination test, which again will be a better predictor of stand establishment in your fields. So hopefully that will happen in the not too distant future. Another area that drastically impacts growers' income is variety selection, probably the most important decision that you'll make. And I took some results from various states across the Cotton Belt, looking at the 2024 trials. These are just 4 examples. Looking at the impact of choosing the best variety or the top couple varieties versus kind of the middle of the pack varieties. And here in this third column here that I'm kind of highlighting with the pointer, averaged across the Arizona, Mississippi, Georgia, and North Carolina locations, the difference between those top yielders and those medium yielders averaged 192 pounds of lint per acre. If you add in the value of that, I was figuring here just 75 cents just to keep it simple. Then you add in the seed value, you're looking at nearly $192 per acre difference between selecting a high yielding variety versus a middle of the pack variety. And then obviously that additional lint and additional seed has, kind of downstream impacts on our gens and also our livestock and our oil mills. So, just do due diligence. Nearly every state, every cotton state has a very strong variety testing program. It's unbiased information. Look at that, get that information. If you can't find it, get a hold of me and I'll be happy to direct you to those locations. But very important management decision. Obviously, in addition to yield, it depends on herbicide traits and other, the entire package. but, don't pigeonhole yourself just based off, one or two of these parameters. And then obviously, depending if you're expecting a lot of either insect pressure, certain diseases, nematode traits, those obviously have to play into that equation as well. But just doing your due diligence, choosing those varieties correctly can make a huge difference in your interim economic situation. Now, another area that I think there's still opportunities to reduce input costs without negatively impacting yield is increasing nitrogen use efficiency. And about a year ago on Cotton and Coffee, I gave a more in-depth presentation over this, but I just wanted to kind of highlight a few of these points because, again, I think it's a great opportunity to credit some of that nitrogen that's there. And that means that's nitrogen fertilizer that we don't have to put out, especially the way nitrogen prices have kind of spiked in the past week or two. But again, taking into account crop rotation, if you're in a rotation with soybeans, peanuts, there's definitely going to be nitrogen coming into that system and available that cotton crop from those. Also, historical management. If you're in a rotation with corn and you've been fertilizing for high yielding corn over time, you're likely have quite a bit of nitrogen accumulation in those soils as well. And then again, as a lot of folks have transitioned to, no-till or very reduced till and or integrating cover crops into that, we also get a lot of mineralization from our organic matter. And really all of the nitrogen recommendations for every state has been based off of conventional tillage. So now that our systems have shifted, we are getting a lot more mineralization, which means available nitrogen in the soil to your cotton crop. And then just kind of as a baseline, cotton needs about 40 pounds of actual nitrogen, produce that first bale, then probably about 30 or 35 for each additional bale after that. And, again, from these top few factors, we know that there's a lot of nitrogen that's going down into the soil. And for the vast majority of the cotton belt, a lot of that is staying down in the soil and is totally plant available. So it's kind of like a bank account for you, if you will, that's down there that you guys have been contributing to over time, that now you can access, in kind of these times of need and tight times. But really, I just want to emphasize, you really don't know this until you do some soil tests. Most commercial labs will test for soil nitrates, and some will do ammonium. And then many will do also these organic tests, which will give you an idea of how much organic nitrogen's out there. And again, all of that can be credited. So some of the research funded by Cotton Incorporated, again, across the cotton belt from 2020 to 2024, 142 sites over that time frame. This was done, again, literally from Virginia out to Arizona. Still 50% of those locations were not responding to nitrogen application. That they had applications of 0, 40, 80, 120, and 160. And that means when I say non-responsive, it means the 0 nitrogen applied had the same yields as the 40, 80, 120, or 160. And it's not that cotton plant doesn't need nitrogen, it does, but that just means that there was nitrates and ammonium and other nitrogen sources in that soil that plant was able to pull from and to make, again, equivalent yields to where nitrogen was applied. And the responsive sites, essentially the vast majority of those, had at least 70% of their maximum yield occurred from 0 nitrogen applied. So really the 40, 80, 120, that additional 30% came from that 40, 80, or maybe in some situations 120 pounds of N applied. So just kind of looking at that, dynamic and what it's going to take in cost to get that additional maximum yield. But again, I just want to re-emphasize, you really have to take soil tests to determine how much nitrogen is down there. If those soil tests come back and say there's quite a bit, basically subtract it from what you would typically apply in a nitrogen fertilizer form. And I think there's also, we've kind of got into a trend in many cases, thinking of cotton as a grain crop in some situations, or even, peanuts or soybeans, where we kind of expect it to be green till the very end. But we got to remember that cotton is a perennial crop. At the end of the season, as those bolls mature, it should be naturally senescing. So it's okay if we look like this, 40 pounds cotton here, which is again is starting to turn colors, starting to turn orange and a little bit of yellow. In this plot here, this study here, actually the 40-pound maximized yields. And when you start getting these higher N rates, it can be detrimental to yields because easily you can over apply nitrogen fertilizer in cotton and hurt your yields. But also it generally leads to excess plant growth regulators, expenses of plant growth regulators, additional expenses with defoliation and challenges there, which can also lead to, higher leaf grades and those kinds of things. So there's many reasons to kind of refine that nitrogen management, if you will. And then further looking at nitrogen, some areas or things that could be done to reduce the loss of nitrogen. So we know applications of urea in particular, we can lose a lot of it to volatility. In this example, we're looking at West Texas, but we have these results from the Delta and the Southeast from Hunter Frame, Katie Lewis, and Tyson Raper conducted these trials. But basically, if you are going with surface application of urea, and I'm not sure that a lot of people are still doing this, but you can easily lose up to 60% of that due to volatility, within the first 2 weeks. Surface banded, that reduces about cut in half, about 30% can be lost. But if you look at urea subsurface banded, you're looking at virtually no volatility loss at all. So you're getting every pound of that nitrogen is available to those plants. If you are doing the surface broadcast application, there can be some advantages to some of these nitrogen inhibitors here. And you can see with surface applied with this nitropyrin, a 30%, basically a 50% reduction in volatility, and then urea plus NBPT, about a 50% reduction in volatility as well. So if you are going with that surface application, there definitely could be some value to those, adding that to your nitrogen. And also, as nitrogen prices are higher and things are pinched quite a bit, we know that there's a lot of various products out there, from biostimulants to inoculants to biofertilizer, various other things. There's a very large space right now with lots of startup companies, and lots of big companies have entered this area. So I just wanted to point out, as these are out there, you guys are probably going to get bombarded with these new products that are coming to the market. And many of these have not been proven to be effective. So in a year like this year, again, where profit margins are really tight, I just would encourage folks to, go with what we know works, which is just nitrogen fertilizer or your other fertilizer sources, and maybe steer away from some of these microbial products. And if you are going to test them, so you want to get a feel for it, just do it on some small acreage.
Hey.
Better idea. And kind of along those lines, this question has been coming up for many years with the microbial products. So the extension cotton specialists across the Cotton Belt conducted a trial in 2023 and 2024, looking at some of these different products that are listed here on the bottom, and then compared them to just traditional nitrogen applications. So that they had a stair-step nitrogen rate of 0, 40, 80, 120, 160. And then each of these microbials were applied per the label of them, but also 40 pounds of nitrogen fertilizer was applied. So if you look at the yield from those various microbial products, basically they didn't yield any better than just the 40 pounds of nitrogen applied. So anyway, just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as you're considering some of these products. If they're not proven, if you don't have unbiased information on them, this may be the year to kind of steer away from that. Now, weed management is another one. I know again, times have been tight for many years now, and a lot of the fats already been trimmed both on, fertilizer inputs and also, pesticides and pest management. Um, this is where I think it's a really balancing act on your farm as to what can be cut without sacrificing, uh, long term some of the challenges that could be presented. But visiting with the various weed scientists across the cotton belt, probably some of the most important things that we can do is starting clean. And once you start clean, minimize that soil disturbance so you're not bringing more weed seeds to the surface to germinate and creating more flushes of weeds. And then if you're in a cover cropping system, there can be lots of benefits to suppressing weeds. Either they'll suppress them or preventing them from growing or germinating at all. So taking full advantage of those cover crops, allowing those to produce as much biomass as you can manage. And again, keeping that suppression there. And then also just prioritizing the herbicides with the best value to your weed spectrum. Knowing what your weeds are out there, knowing which weeds are resistant to glyphosate or some of the other herbicides that are out there, and just making sure you're really targeting those herbicides to the weed spectrum that you have within that field. Another thing I think it's very important, and it's maybe kind of a hard sell in many ways because it's an upfront cost, but pre-emergence herbicides are generally a really good investment. There's very few there's very little herbicide resistance to pre-emergence herbicides. And there's also some very effective and relatively inexpensive herbicides that are pre-emergence herbicides on the market that can easily give you 3, 4, 5 weeks of weed control. So that buys you time and flexibility for some of your post programs. Also buys you that opportunity to let that cotton crop get started with no weed competition. And again, as you're thinking about, where can you cut costs, just, try to keep in mind these remaining 2 points. If weeds get away from you, those weed seeds are going to be around for a long time. So just, however you reach that balancing act. But any weed escapes can lead to higher management costs in future years. And then also just recognize that, herbicide resistance continues to spread. Really every state, every cotton belt state has quite a few herbicide resistant weeds. Either reach out to your extension weed specialist. They can tell you from surveys they have on which weeds are resistant. Reach out to me and I'll be glad to help you as well. And then kind of continuing on the weed focus, we know that, again, probably not that many people are going to be investing in new equipment, for this upcoming year, but just be aware there's lots of new things out there when it comes to See and Spray technology. We typically just think of the John Deere See and Spray system because that's kind of the dominant one. But here's a list that Ed put together of, over 25 See and Spray type systems that are out there on the market that may be much more economically viable depending on your situation than some of the others. So just kind of keeping this in mind. And again, these links will be available through Stacy when she sends out the follow-up email to everyone that's watching. So again, based off just the See and Spray system, was quite a bit of work done in Arkansas, both funded through Cotton Incorporated and other sources. But if you were considering the See and Spray type system, this is just one example from a publication at the University of Arkansas. Kind of what are the opportunities and the general economics associated with the See and Spray system. With this, they did take into account a $5 per acre subscription fee, which I think may have changed a little bit. But one very important component here is the herbicide cost per acre. So with the See and Spray Premium, which is basically the one boom and single tank application system, you're looking at, until you get really a herbicide cost over $10 per acre, the viability of the See and Spray system really doesn't bring a whole lot to the table. As you're getting to those more expensive herbicides, then yes, the See and Spray system can have a positive return on investment. You can see the various crops there, and then moving over to the See and Spray Ultimate, which is a double boom, double tank type system. really you have to get herbicide costs above $15 per acre before that really becomes economical viable. And just a scenario here, looking at the premium system, really it would take about an application between 13 to 20,000 acres before it was a positive return on investment, for it's basically paying for itself. And then for the ultimate system, those acres are nearly triple that. So anyway, just some scenarios. There's a QR code there you can go to. It's like a 4-page publication, goes to different scenarios. And if you're considering this, it's a really good place to kind of start. And we are working with Simmerberg at Auburn and again, University of Arkansas. We are doing some more in-depth research in this area too, to get at the economics of the seed and spray systems. And with that, that concludes the data that I was going to present. Here are some resources. Some of these Ed mentioned, but Cotton Cultivated has a plethora of different publications out there and availability. I do want to point out the Cotton Specialist Corner podcast. Camp Hand leads that. He has the various cotton specialists come on at various times. Entomologist, plant pathologist, covers a wide variety of topics, but that can be found at Cotton Specialist Corner, and also you can get it through Cotton Cultivated, and then Focus on Cotton or webcast out there, generally related to general management practices, and fairly timely in those presentations. Again, if you have more interest in improving your nitrogen use efficiency, you can go to the presentation that I made last year at YouTube, at the Cotton and Coffee YouTube station. And then if you have questions about anything that was presented today by Ed or myself, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, after this presentation. And I guess right now, Stacy will be happy to answer any questions that have popped up in the chat or people want to bring up.